Okay, so part two. In terms of powers, things that have dominion over all of us, I disagree with the fact that it should be a human. And I've heard these talking points recently. And I believe that not only is that not okay for the person who is placing you as their everything, it's also not okay for you. It doesn't end well. It is you taking responsibility for things that no mortal would be able to ever control. It's you forgetting and refusing to acknowledge the fact that we as humans, as mortals, we have specific limits. You are requiring someone to believe that you don't have any limits. But then do you handle the consequences appropriately when that's no longer, the issue, when you can't deny it anymore, when you're now being faced with the idea that we've now reached your specific limit. So if there is a higher power, I believe that from what we were taught, whether it's life, it's the universe, it's karma, whatever you believe in, God by any name that you choose to use, is going to test you. It's what's supposed to happen to keep you grounded in reality. That to me is a delusional thought process because it's something that could never exist. You're taking on too big of a responsibility knowingly and expecting it not to fail or pretending to be shocked if it ever does. If you are attempting to be somebody's everything, there needs to be a plan B. And whatever that plan B is, means that you are by definition not qualified to be someone's everything or their higher power. I believe it's arrogant, and I really hope that y'all are trolling. I hope that you guys are not teaching young children to believe that that's something that's possible, because I don't see that going anywhere good for our society. And if you do, please let me know. I am willing to have that conversation. I believe that that is foolish and or arrogant, and it would be one way to perpetuate all of the things that we are coming together collectively to complain about in our society, in our communities. Words that I've been told that I use that don't exist, because we all have flaws, and I've done the same thing that I'm saying here today too. I'm not above reproach. Utopia and perfection, these are descriptors of a thing that cannot be reached, something that you can strive towards to keep you focused on and moving in the right direction. If you were to ever reach those things, be aware and knowledgeable of the fact that they indicate eternal rest. You're done. You're finished. You've done and completed everything that you were designed to do. And also, they are subjective. My definition of perfection and utopia might be different than yours, so it can never be something that can be reached collectively either. There's a reason for that. So if those things exist, what are the barriers to them? Their opposite concept already exists, right? But let's just go into what utopia normally encompasses. When do you reach the end? Old age. It means you've lived a long enough time and you've been able to stay alive until your mind and your spirit has been functioning and available to your earthly body until the body itself is incapable of continuing to function. It shuts down. You've outlasted all of your organs and processes as they were designed. Now, there are contributing factors to that, but the point is, you now teach us what happens at the end. So there's a purpose for that life. Illness, injury, bad decisions. All of these things have something in common. What they have in common is destruction, a place of ill comfort, and eventually they all end. Now, how they end, the person who is actually ending won't ever know. But those of us left behind will be able to use it as for educational purposes. Utopia and perfection doesn't exist. So why do we have people working on medications to relieve suffering? You're trying to reach something, right? You're trying to end the pain, the illness. You're trying to recover from the bad decision. But if you believe that morbid way of thinking that, had people to challenge what I said this weekend, then if you believe that, death is not a painless process. It definitely is going to hurt because your mind and feelings and nerve endings have gotten used to a certain baseline here through existence. So to change that, to be missing any of those components, is definitely going to be what we experience as painful. So my point for all of that is there are lots of things in the world that can't be reached. There are things that shouldn't be reached. But when you want to be someone's everything or their higher power, you actually in turn become the opposite. You become their lower power. Why should they have to go through you? They can work with you. They can work under you for the same cause. But to be their higher power is unattainable and not necessarily a positive thing to even want. With utopia and perfection, at least it's something that we can want. But you have to be an adult and realize that you're not going to get it. It allows you to have and quantify the thing that you want but can never have. So everything else that's earthly is available to you. And this is just my thought process. It's a theory that I'm working on. So you won't find a whole lot of written research that supports that. And that's the reason why is thinking about whether or not this is something that is helpful. How do you guys feel about second chances in life? Do you want one? What do you think means a person deserves one? And I think that the answer to those two questions are in the first part of the video. Where are you in life? What are you hearing being and saying? The times where you're not in control of what's going on, the time where you relinquish control to someone or something else. The things that you hear are the things that you find yourself saying. They have a pattern. There's a purpose for those sentences. So when do we relinquish power? Well, if you are being a listening ear for one of your friends, you're giving them the power to, place words and ideas into your environment and for you to think about. You're not in control of that conversation because they are asking you to let them control for a second so that you can then get into their predicament and see what advice you have to offer or what support you might be able to provide for them. It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes when you relinquish power and control to something else, you get to rest. You get to recuperate from any previous injuries. So being a shoulder to cry on is also involved in that, as well as requesting that from someone else. I talked a little bit in the first video about word choices. Our languages follow patterns and they evolve and we add things to them. I realize that we are having a debate amongst black people, or maybe I'm the only one who's seen this, about whether or not Ebonics and slang are still relevant, whether or not it is correlated with low education, whether you're just trying or not trying. Another part of that debate for me is when people are mentioning, why should I have to say not all? Because if you're giving a speech, you should have placed in there all of the words to prevent anyone twisting your thought process, and then you are not allowed to have an attitude if someone twists your words because you allowed space to do so. All of our great orators, all of our great speeches, our ideals, things that we still study, they didn't allow for a whole lot of twisting the idea, but they do allow for debate about the rationale, the environment that allowed that speech to be necessary. So we are not bogged down in the first level of discourse regarding the speech. We get to think about higher things in terms of its meaning, its symbolism. and how we can use it going forward. We're not trapped in just trying to understand the words. With that being said, there's a study called Linguistics, and that's what it does. It teaches us the nuances between each language and how that might be related to their culture. When people speak, those words have meaning and you can infer things from them. That's how speech is designed to be used. So to say that, well, you should just automatically know, even if we are in the same culture, if we have slight differences, I can know reasonably, but I shouldn't automatically and absolutely know. That, in my opinion, would be arrogant. There are two branches that I am familiar with and that I've been thinking of. So there's the branch of science, law, things that can be solidified. A lot of our words that we have when we're dealing with science and law usually come from Latin origin. There are languages that have derived from Latin. And why do we still use Latin words? Because no one has dethroned their research and their contributions to those fields. They're still the most prominent culture that made the best advances that we still use and build on today. That's the importance of knowing the origin of the words that we use when we're going to communicate with one another. That's the importance of knowing when I go into this doctor's office, when I'm talking to this lawyer, what thought processes are they going to be discussing with me? When they say something to me, where is that thought probably coming from? The same with philosophy, astronomy, the things that are abstract. Who made the biggest strides that we still build on today? Greek. And what that means is the languages that come from that branch of linguistics are probably going to have a culture that's related to things that are intangible. Okay, so at the risk of, avoiding rambling that I have the tendency to do, the point is there are lots of derivatives. So there are things that we started out with, and then knowing what the derivatives are can let you know where, who you're talking to and what you're possibly about to hear, and what frame of reference to use when decoding its value and purpose in your life. If you keep hearing some of the same commonalities and the themes in what you're saying to others and what people are saying to you, there is possibly a message that is bigger than you. It's a message that the rest of the community around you has either gone through or has been thinking about. It's not necessarily that you're late to the conversation, it's that other things required your attention. And so now, those things are either finished or less important, and it's time to change your focus to this. So, 3 of the biggest things that we all hear, right? 1, if you hear a lot of people saying no, never, not now. These are all negative things, and if you hear that a lot when people are talking to you, it might be time for you to rest, to recuperate, to be still, to let something pass before you, because it's probably not a good thing that will help you in your purpose. You can, in fact, keep going, but understand that there's going to be some damage associated with that. Number 2 is yes, now. Things that give you an affirmative. So that means it's time for you to get up and move. If you have been sitting, if you have been resting, it's time to be active now. Your waiting period is over. The danger has been avoided, what have you, right? And finally, if you're hearing a lot of maybe or it depends, the other half of that is if you hear a lot of things that say pick, choose, decide, and any derivatives of that. So there's a lot of conversations going on now in the Black community, especially for people my age. That's what I've noticed. Everyone that I'm talking to about these conversations is close to my age. I'm not having these conversations with, young adults or older people. They can add their advice, they can add their viewpoint to the conversation, but the conversation is usually initiated by people who are late 30s, early 40s. So you hear things such as, well, maybe, well, it depends. And what that means is we are now coming into the age where we are realizing that there isn't a whole lot of hard stances. Life is not all black and white. That this is the age range where most generations come into that thought process. The other half is pick, choose, decide, because it depends is the answer to pick, choose, and decide for us at this moment. So with that being said, I go to the conversations that draw my attention. And so this past week, there's been a lot of discussion of ending relationships. A lot of us are either getting divorced or we're making the decision to stay in a marriage or in a relationship. We're picking, we're choosing, we're deciding. We're at a fork in the road. And so, as always, if you have any questions or any comments, please leave them in the comment bar below the video. I'll answer them as best as I can. Otherwise, I'll do a whole lot of talking to y'all later. Bye.